Good morning and welcome to the 16th meeting of the Constitution Europe External Affairs and Culture Committee in 2025. We welcome to committee this morning Jackie Bailey, who is joining us for this session. Our first agenda item this morning is to take evidence on the BBC Scotland. But can I give a gentle reminder to committee members before we begin that the committee has no role in operational or editorial decisions of the BBC Scotland. However, we do have a role in holding the BBC to account for those decisions that impact the screen industry in Scotland. And this will be the focus of today's session. So we're joined this morning by Linda Rook, President, and Paul Fleming, General Secretary of both of Equity, and a warm welcome to Frank Gallagher, actor and member of the River City cast. I'll begin with a couple of questions and then we'll move to questions from the committee members. In broad terms, do you think the closure of the production site at Dumbarton and the end of River City, what will that mean for the TV sector in Scotland? And specifically, what is the likely impact to have on opportunities for young people from across diverse backgrounds who may pursue a career both in front of and behind the camera? And if I could maybe start with Paul. Thanks. It's okay.
It does it automatically.
Yeah, it should come on automatically for you. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you very much for having all of us. It's a very, very good question to start off with, because I think where we've got to look at it from is Equity is obviously a trade union with a trade union interest in the survival of River City, the survival of the studios at Dumbarton and the strategy of the BBC. And indeed, the kind of reminder you started off with, it's very similar to ours. This isn't an editorial or a content question. This is an industrial question for us as a trade union. I'll let Linda speak more eloquently than I can about the role soaps play in the general ecosystem, what that means in terms of training and the voices that are allowed, and perhaps Frank to talk specifically about the training that goes on at River City, which is frankly outstanding and unique. But the point I'd make at the beginning, just to go on, is about those studios in Dumbarton. We have been consistently messed around with the BBC as to what the grounds are for the closure, which at the very least has been a series of mixed drinks, if not a complete elixir of confusing fabrications. At the heart of it is the line that the BBC has to close the studios at Dumbarton because of the behaviour or the desires of the landlord. Now, there's an ambiguity about how true that is, but fundamentally at the heart of that, we have to ask ourselves, how committed is the BBC to cultural infrastructure production in Scotland if a private landlord can say at the 11th hour, we don't want you here anymore, and suddenly a major production, major facilities are lost overnight? Entirely separate from the soaps question, there is a kind of infrastructure question about what does this really mean? So I'll let Linda and Frank talk about soaps and River City more generally, but Linda, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, thanks. Yes, I'm an actor and I've worked across a range of soaps, not River City, but a lot of other ones. Brookside, Coronation Street, The Bill, Casualty, Albion Market, if I can reflect you back to that one back in the day, all of those. And I'm currently serving 20 years for perverting the course of justice on Coronation Street. So, but, you know, if Starmer lets me out early, I'll be back in. But basically, what I have witnessed over the years of working across soaps is that they are a ground that allows people who normally don't have easy access into the film and television industry to actually get in there. They become a training ground, both on screen and off screen. And it allows people from marginalised communities in particular to actually enter into the industry, which can be a very closed shop with a lot of barriers involved, especially outside London and the southeast. So for me, I've witnessed members working on screen who've now gone on to do have amazing careers. But would they have got there in the first place if they hadn't come in through soaps? There's a very good chance the answer would be no. And the same for behind the scenes as well, in terms of technicians, etc. Over the years, I've worked on a soap, and then I've worked on another programme, maybe later, something like Endeavour. And guess what? There's somebody who's in the crew who's actually worked on one of the soaps back in the day. So they get career progression. But I'll let Frank speak now.
Well, I've been working down at River City for about 20 years now, and I have to say, enjoyable, a great place to work with the people that run it. What I would find most to say about it is it's not about just the actors. There's a crew in there, there's all the technicians in there, there's the catering staff, there's the security staff, makeup and wardrobe. And the way people find their way into River City a lot of the time, which has been very, very pleasing to watch over the last few years, it was a training academy set up to bring young Scottish people in, to give them a foothold, to let them see and work with seasoned professionals about how the job works. So when they move on to their next job, they'll have an idea. They're not going in cold. And this has been working very well over the last few years. The main thing I would say is the youth. If you'd have been there that day when the bombshell was dropped in the canteen, all you would have seen was a look of astonishment and disappointment on these young people's faces. Because that's their way in. There's nowhere else like it in Scotland. I'm not even sure if there's anywhere like it in Britain that brings people in specifically to train to work in Scotland. And that's what they're there for. This is people that want to work in their own country, in their own business in their own country, hear their own voices in their own country. There's a lot of indignation sometimes about soap actors, as they're called. What I've always liked to say is, I'm not a soap actor. I'm an actor that happens to be in a soap. But there seems to be a look down on you a lot of the ways as well, which I find incredible. Because the people that work incredibly hard, and I'm sure Linda knows who work in the soap, it's the hardest business. The hours are the hardest you're going to do. But it's looking for things for people to do afterwards. For people to come out and say, I've had that piece of training. I can take part in this industry now. And I don't see why we should get rid of it. I mean, this is our voice we're talking about here. This is our culture we're talking about here. You know, in my mind, Scottish accents and programmes are very quiet as it is. I mean, do we want to silence them? There should be a place in our own country for people that want to work in their own country, instead of waiting for some dramas that are probably brought up from the BBC production in London. And this is a thing that we all know about as actors. But as I say, it's not just about the actors. There's a whole industry here. It's like asking viewers, you know, what their bugbears are. There's sometimes now you can't find out when River City's on. You know, if you're a regular viewer and you tune in a Tuesday night, all of a sudden it's disappeared. Because there'll be something else put in its place. So that doesn't help the audience either. I don't think it helped much putting it on BBC channel either, because, well, not a lot of people watch that channel, to be honest with you. But all I would say, it's a very important part of Scottish industry. If you watch the amount of people that come through that over the few years, and it's not just crew, writers as well. There have been over 40 first-time writers on it in the last 3 or 4 years. And a big percentage of them are women as well. So there's that to look at. You go, where do you go now if you want to speak in your own voice? And that's my main thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank, you opened up something that is of concern and has been of concern of the committee about what constitutes a Scottish production for the BBC's fulfilment of their obligations for creating in Scotland. So, in your view, do you see, if River City isn't there, how will the BBC fulfil that obligation and replace, can it replace that hole that will be left?
I think it would be very difficult to replace. It covers a place in Scottish television that nothing else really does. There's a lot of productions come up and they're called BBC Scotland Productions. But people laugh at that, to be honest with you. They think it's BBC Scotland and BBC Scotland only, because it's basically using BBC Scotland's money. You'll find a lot of the crew, a lot of the actors are all coming from down south. We need a voice up here that is ours. And there's no shame in it. You know, I mean, I don't know why we're always putting ourselves down when we do homegrown things. We should be celebrating it and asking for it to get better. You know, money's another thing of just... when we were asked to do almost down to 10 days to film 4 episodes, which is 2 hours of television over 10 days, and it became a health and safety risk because of the hours that people were doing. And then we put it up to 12 days, and that was agreed with the BBC to put it up to 12 days. But there was no more money forthcoming. Instead, what they'd done was just cut the weeks that were actually on screen. which for anybody following a soap, you just lose the place. You can see why people get upset when I don't know what's going on. But if it's a continuous drama, then it should be a continuous drama. And I know everybody, there's budgets everywhere to be looked after. What you're asking for is a crack of the whip.
Linda, would you like to come in on the production aspect?
Absolutely. I mean, Frank's hit the nail on the head when he was talking about stories and authentic stories, you know. And the fact that people do come up and just use wherever they're filming in say, Scotland, in this case, you know, fantastic scenery, you know, great locations to be able to use. But will those stories reflect Scotland in 2025? And will it actually be people who live in this nation will actually be used? And that's really, really important. You know, if the streamers come in and dominate this area with whatever it is, that will not be the product that is made, and there'll be no guarantee that people like Frank and anybody else based in this nation will actually be used. I witnessed this right across the UK in all the 4 nations, and the bias is London and the South East, and certainly it will not be up here for sure.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to add anything?
I mean, there's very little to add, because the point that's been made is that soaps are very hard to do a bit of dodgy accounting on. The soap is made, it has a permanent workforce, but actors, crew and beyond. It is clearly established, rooted in communities and rooted in storylines that are about a place. You can't claim, you can't ship that off somewhere else in the country. You can't get, you've got a permanent workforce that's there that are able to build sustainable careers and take other work around that. That's the kind of core of why a soap is an easy way to fulfil that obligation. Where our concerns are, when the BBC says they're going to replace River City with other productions, is that they're much easier to essentially label BBC Scotland but not deliver it. It's a lot easier to be a Scottish actor and work in Scotland and live in London. That's the truth. And without workplaces like River City, without soaps themselves, that will become more and more and more true.
Thank you. I'm going to move to questions from the committee. I'll bring in Mr Stewart and then Mr Bibby.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning. And thank you for your briefing note, but also thank you for your frankness and honesty so far in this session, because I do think that you've identified already the crux of the matter, which is, you know, culture in Scotland is being eroded, or it appears to be being eroded, and this is another step in that process. And the broader picture of ensuring that BBC Scotland recognise that there is a public broadcasting duty to what you've explained already. And I think most of us get that round the table and we understand where you're coming from. But it's how you manage to get that message further. You know, you've already identified today about the potential loss for opportunities for young people, the training, the apprenticeships, whatever may be within the process. But it's how you manage to ensure that we keep that, or we show that the loss of that would be so detrimental to the industry and so detrimental to the sector. And I think that's where we're all coming from for this process today. And my initial question would be, how should we galvanise as a parliament and as a process here to support and try and see how we can, you know, we can bring people here, we can ask questions, we can probe, we can, you know, do all of that. But at the end of the day, we want, if there's a campaign or there's a process to be done, where do we take that? How do we manage that to make sure that we get success? Because, as I say, if this is lost, then what is next to be lost? And what is next to be lost after that? Paul, maybe first.
I mean, I think that what is next to be lost is the question Equity is asking ourselves as well. River City, as far as we're concerned, is the Rubicon that we're not prepared to cross. And it is something which, because of the the passion that I know that are held by lots of members of this committee, we think that this is something where we can hold the BBC to account for not just their behaviour actually in Scotland, but also they're driving our members into greater precarity through the loss of soaps elsewhere in the country. We've seen what happened with the loss of doctors in Birmingham. We were told that a replacement for doctors, an adequate replacement, would be MasterChef. In a very similar way, we're told that, the BBC's investing in Scotland, here's a load of traitors. I mean, traitors does not employ actors as professional actors. That's not the role of it. And actually, if you look at the economic value that it creates, because it is a small, contained production, again, brought up from London, a bit of a flash in the pan, who is it actually engaging? Who is that supporting? How is it growing an industry in Scotland? And I think that's the question the committee really needs to focus in on when they speak to the BBC, because there can be a lot of smoke and mirrors about we'll protect this money for drama, we'll protect this money for Scotland. But the real question is what value is it delivering to Scotland? What value is it delivering to our members? So asking the BBC, what is your commitment to cultural infrastructure in Scotland is critical. Being able to write on River City, being able to act on River City gives you an ability to work in a theatre, gives you an ability to go and develop your own craft and develop your own work elsewhere in the sector. It means you can afford to raise a family in Scotland, that rather than being forced to move back to London or elsewhere, even as a Scottish actor, because work opportunities are more plentiful. That is the structure, the infrastructure that Scotland needs to build. Now, if they're not going to do it with soaps, OK, but how? And answering that with, we'll produce more drama. This isn't an artistic question about producing drama. This is a serious economic question about growth, about infrastructure, and about a commitment to the people who live here.
I mean, if I could.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, like Holby City, which was actually based down in Boreham Wood. There was a promise when that closed that there would be a new programme and production made in the northeast of England. It's never happened. Birmingham, as you heard from Paul, with doctors. There was promise then of more drama being done there, and what do we get? We got MasterChef. And having looked at some of the notes, I now see that there's 3 potential productions that could replace here. But what I think your duty would be is to dig down and deconstruct exactly what those promises are. Because I can almost guarantee they will not replace the jobs or the infrastructure or any of those things that Frank has certainly been talking about and his experience. I doubt that that will be the case when you really dig down into it. For instance, Traitors is made by All 3 Media. If you look to see who actually owns that, it's not in the UK. Thank you.
Would you like to add anything?
I just think it would be nice to get it out there what you're actually going to miss. Because people talk about River City, and I know better than anybody else. It's not everybody's cup of tea. But then what is? As my friend said to me earlier. But I think what's happened over the years as well is we've let it become a bit of a joke. No matter how hard people are working, and they are working hard, there seems to be this experience in the Scottish media that it's there to be laughed at. In my understanding, River City was getting more viewers than EastEnders or Coronation Street in Scotland. But you wouldn't know it for the Scottish media, because you're basically a postage stamp up in the top right-hand corner. And I think it would just be good to people to understand what it is they could be losing here, and what could actually replace it. As you say, do you want more MasterChef, or do you want to sit and watch the One Show at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night? Do you not rather hear something that's in your own voice, even twice a week? Just tune in for half an hour. Hear your own voice being spoken about, your own culture. To me, that's important in this country, that we keep it there. Thanks.
And the budget that they've set. I mean, I know you're calling for that to be ring-fenced, that would support and save that process. I mean, how likely do you think that is from the BBC, the communications you've had? We've had them here, and as you've said already, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors goes into how they try to indicate what they're trying to achieve or their proposals are. But when you scrape the surface and underneath, things are not quite as rosy or as pleasant or as what they're trying to achieve. So by having that funding in some capacity, you believe that would give you opportunities to develop and progress?
I mean, I mean, we're asking a good faith question as to how the BBC can. This is their offer. and we're going to ring fence this money, we're going to ring fence this for drama, we're going to ring fence this for Scotland. Okay, and what does that mean for us as a trade union and our members' jobs? Well, what does this mean for production facilities in Dunbarton? What does this mean in terms of the broader artistic community that's here? You know, how are you going to ensure that the people who are working on these new productions can have a sustainable career in the arts and entertainment industries? Those are the metrics by which we will hold them accountable on that commitment. And frankly, the BBC cannot deliver adequate answers to those questions. And one of our deep frustrations is the lack of consultation we have had about what we're doing nationally about soaps. There's no doubt in our mind this is really important because of River City in Scotland, but also if it wasn't River City, it might be Publicum in Wales. If it wasn't River City, it may well be Silent Witness or a number of other long-running dramas, which are de facto continuous dramas elsewhere in the UK. So what's the strategy here? We all accept viewer habits are changing. We all accept that there has to be artistic and editorial development. But what is the strategy to replace the sorts of employment and infrastructure that these things provide? And frankly, giving us 9 million quid tomorrow or giving us 3 dramas tomorrow, well, how long do these things last? What happens if they're not popular? River City's got a fan base. It's got a clear, dedicated viewership. How are they brought along on this road? Who are those people? What are the demographics of those people? Are we making drama to work for them? None of these questions can be answered adequately by the BBC. So, do we believe that you could do it? Yes. Have they got to think very, very, very deeply about what a soap strategy is in every part of the UK, and what a soap strategy looks like? What metrics do you assess it by? And the BBC just aren't prepared to do that work. And it feels like, the words Linda used earlier, there is a continued asset stripping of the BBC, as we see across the public sector, as a desire, essentially, to drive out one of the jewels in the crown of the welfare state. And part of the function of the BBC is to provide stable, high-quality employment to artists to ensure that they can exist outside of the productions that they're working on. And again, 9 million quid for 3 dramas for, however long the Director-General cares to give it to you is not really that sort of deep intellectual commitment.
Thank you, Convener.
Debbie?
Thank you. Convener, good morning to the panel. We had BBC in front of us, the BBC in front of us in January, and there was no mention of this impending decision. Frank mentioned it was a bombshell. Paul, you just said, talked about a lack of consultation. Can I just confirm, were Equity consulted in advance of the decision being made?
No.
Right. Well, and that was clearly a big shock for the cast and crew, Frank, as you said.
It was a stunner because we'd all come into work that morning, unbeknownst of anything going on, and then we were asked to meet in the canteen at 12 o'clock for lunch. And there was a couple of statements read out, and that was basically, now you all know. Right? Thanks for all your service, but move along now.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's obviously concerning if any employer takes decisions without, consulting the union in advance, and that's obviously the case for the BBC as well. In terms of the BBC have said that, talked a lot about the free replacement dramas and the £9 million being ring-fenced. From what you've said already, that it's clear you don't think that's going to fill the gap that is currently provided by River City. And my understanding is the overall number of hours of production, even when you take into account all those free dramas, will be less than the current provision under River City. Is that your understanding as well?
Sorry?
The total number of hours that is going to be produced as the free replacement dramas, I think
yes.
it's estimated at 18 fewer hours overall production compared to River City. 18
weeks. What actually happened is, when I first started, we were doing 2 blocks of 18 weeks, 36. And then every year it's just got lower and lower and lower until we get down to the stage we're now at 12 weeks of a block, which I think was actually going to be shorter, but there was a health and safety issue that came up about people taking ill through the hours that they were doing. And so I think it was agreed by the BBC that we'd make it 12-day shoots rather than the 10, 2 extra days. There was no more money for that. So what we decided to do is we just put less on. So we'd had to split it up into 3 11-week sections rather than it being on the 52 weeks a year that it was previously.
But even with the current provision or the current hours of River City, I think what is being proposed as replacements will be significantly less in terms of.
I can't see
overall.
how they would replace it. You're talking about 3 dramas. I mean, even we're on the 33 weeks, and you'll not get close to that with just making single dramas or some series. Yeah. But again, it's about why do you want to take something down? You know, it's there for the people to use. It has been a great training ground for people to come through, and any one of them will tell you. And all of a sudden, you look at it and go, well, we don't need that. But actually, I do think we need it in this country, because there's a lot of people who could be employed in this country with a bit of training.
I can just pick up on the point that you made. It's a really good point about the lack of consultation. And I think when a trade union says, oh, there was a lack of consultation, it's incumbent on us to say what consultation may or may not have delivered. Because we can't just sit here and say, oh, well, you know, we should have been consulted and then we would have ended up in the same place. But if we look at what's happening on other soaps, other productions elsewhere. Let's look at the model that Hollyoaks is looking at, which is kind of an online-first, omnibus-style approach where everything is kind of box-setted together. The BBC is looking at how they engage with this new phenomenon of vertical drama that is primarily watched on your phone. We have serious misgivings about the moving of River City to essentially a secondary channel rather than putting it front and centre of BBC Scotland programming. Well, we actually believe that probably more hours and more production and storylines that are actually intended to be watched in a different way from a weekly soap or drama would may well deliver different outcomes. The reason consultation would have been important is there are lessons to be learned against the evolving face of soaps around the UK, and we as a union have lots of answers as to how this good work, good jobs, important infrastructure could have been protected by different behaviours, editorial behaviours on the part of the BBC. That consultation, there is a very real possibility that it would deliver a material outcome. And I think the point to be made as well, the demand of the union is very clear. We want to save River City. We don't believe industrially you can replace soaps. We don't believe that there are enough options and avenues have been tried to ensure that a really important part of the Scottish cultural infrastructure is sustained. However, the point has to be made that our members are sat there with the prospect of no redundancy payment from the BBC, no clear line on where their contracts end, which may well be a very different question from where the soap ends. They don't know how to, many of them, their agents, they have a relationship with their agents, but their agents haven't been getting them work in the same way as they would do if they were entirely freelance. They are being jettisoned out. So again, what consultation does, it allows us to have a dignified exit, if that is what River City needs, if there is a reformulation of who's in the cast, if there's a reformulation of storylines, as has been happening on Hollyoaks recently in the northwest of England, we've been able to have those conversations. What is really frustrating with the BBC is there is a high-handedness where they suggest that consultation wouldn't have changed anything because of viewer habits and the behaviour of a landlord. We have questions about the behaviour of the landlord. We know that other producers are dealing with viewing habits in different ways and using established brands as ways to experiment with different and innovative ways to present this sort of drama content. It just hasn't been stress tested by the BBC enough, and the people who are suffering are working people. They're our members, they're Beck2 members, technicians, crew, but also the wider infrastructure as well as Frank was mentioning, security staffs, catering staffs, and other people that are a vital part of the drama-making process.
Could I say just sort of the knock-on to the local economy around Dumbarton and things and all of those things that come with it? It's the same. I worked on Hollyoaks for 3 years around Chilwell in Liverpool, and what was an ex-school of Phil Redmond's that he attended became a centre and a hub for drama production, and there was more than just Hollyoaks. Brookside was partly based there as well. So it's really important, and the things that Frank was talking about, absolutely. There is no guarantee that those 3 dramas that they're talking about will ever consider any of those performers who are in River City. There is no guarantee, because the commercial pressures that you will hear about will always be about something more like what the streamers want. And if you look at the streamers' content, it's always, if I dare say it, has an American influence to it. It will not be indigenous production. It will not truly reflect the stories and the narratives, etc., of Scotland in 2025 or whenever it is they decide to do it. But it will be a different take on it. Can I just say that? Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, you mentioned about the BBC talking about changing in viewing habits in relation to linear television. Even with a reduction in viewing figures, there's still a sizable proportion of the Scottish public tune in to watch River City on a regular basis. But as Frank has said, there has been changes in terms of moving slots and moving channels. I just wanted to ask you about marketing and what more could the BBC have done or should do in terms of marketing the programme. There's been some really exciting storylines recently. The BBC should be shouting more about the show, publicising the show's storylines. I think there's also issues about the website not necessarily being updated on a regular basis as well. Some of the information there. Just wanted to see what more could have and should be done to promote the soap by the BBC.
I think it could be trailed more when stories are building up as well, so people know that there's a story worth tuning into at that particular moment. There's also the fact that within the press, it'd be nice if we talked it up sometimes instead of talking it down all the time. And as I said before, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's there for a significant amount of people who have a regular date with it, I would say, every week. And so you blank them out as well. Because their demographic, I mean, it's quite a wide demographic. And there's a lot of people can't sit up till 10 o'clock at night to watch it on the BBC channel. And a lot of players don't have the wherewithal for iPlayers or things like that. So you go like, well, it's 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, 7 o'clock on a Thursday, and then it's not. And then something else is coming to move to 11 o'clock that night. It's just that thing of getting a bit, steady the ship a bit and give it the credit it's due.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Paul, on marketing?
I think the point Frank makes about the habit of the BBC to do down its own content, or indeed to do down its own success, is an endemic problem. So as you're saying, viewer habits are changing, but there is a core viewing audience for River City. The loudest supporters across the UK of the BBC, of the licence fee and of the infrastructure it provides are the American streamers. Well, why is that? They're here because they essentially want to piggyback on the back of the taxpayer, on the back of the licence fee payer, and use the infrastructure the BBC creates. That's no bad thing, because actually what you've got is an ability to attract production from around the world because of River City. It is a bedrock of being able to offer a place here for Netflix or anybody else. And let's remember, the BBC is overwhelmingly the most watched streaming service, not just in the country, but in the whole of Europe. I think it's something in excess of 75% of households across the UK consume more than 8 hours of BBC content a week. That's an extraordinary success story. There's nothing else quite like it in the world. But the BBC tells us that they're failing, that they're losing audiences, that things are really difficult, to justify the sale, essentially, of intellectual property, things that belong rightly to licence fee payers in Scotland and elsewhere, to American streamers. And that is not an acceptable way of doing things. And if they viewed River City as something which is of vital intellectual and artistic importance to them, of structural importance to them, and indeed viewing it as part of a broader strategy to attract investment into Scotland, their marketing behaviours would be very, very, very different.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Marketing, what Frank's talking about, what Paul's talking about. I mean, for instance, Hollyoaks was known for the hangover television. It was the Sunday morning slot. It was it was that kind of double thing that everybody would get up and bleary-eyed would watch whatever, yeah? And that was a kind of a guaranteed thing, and it worked. That worked for audiences. But those other three dramas you're talking about, I can absolutely almost guarantee, and again ask the question, will they be sold actually as BBC Scotland content, or will that just be a kind of a little line at the end of the credits when the show's gone up? Do you know? Will it actually really identify this nation with that programme? I think not.
Thank you very much.
Mr Adam?
Good morning, it's great to see everyone. Linda, when I heard you talking about the many soaps and the dramas you'd been in, my wee ma used to love every soap known to man and beast. She would watch everything. It got even more confusing for my father as the years went on when the telly could automatically turn over, because he lost control of what story was which, especially when many of your work colleagues were appearing in different dramas at the same time. But the whole point is that's that's the kind of core audience, isn't it? That's the kind of people, when you start messing about with schedules, that's a classic case of a production company losing faith in a product and not doing what Frank says, and actually trying to advertise it more and move it on. Because the minute you mess with schedules, that's almost like the death knell to any show. And is it not the case that, you know, maybe having a wee bit more confidence in the product and actually pushing it more would be, because I'm all about our voice being heard. You've appeared in some of the dramas that were crucially important for the North East of England, Brookside, Coronation Street in the 60s. It was revolutionary when it came out. So the whole idea is, when you start doing that, you know, that's the problem. The BBC's lost faith, and they're the ones that are messing about with the actual core audience itself. Is that not the case?
Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, I think the point Frank makes, you know, you move the channel, you move the times, you create confusion. The artistic model of a soap is supposed to be, you sit down, you know when it is. And if we think about linear television, we're all told is dead. Mm-hmm. But everybody watches a football match. Everybody's dependent on linear television for live news. There are lots of really important... If you look at the way a lot of the American streamers now package their big products, they will release in batches in order to create a moment that you talk about with your colleagues, that you discuss on the bus, that you're talking about in the pub. There are lots of ways to make the continuing drama format work and grow its audience, as well as making sure that there's a regular slot on the television that people can sit down and watch, to see stories that reflect them. All of these, again, in a consultation and a proper soap strategy, the BBC could be ahead of the game on it. But they're not. They're going down a very reductive route of managed decline. And managed decline not just of soaps, but also of the entire BBC infrastructure that's so important for our members and, frankly, the economy as a whole.
The other thing is, you've mentioned this before, and I'd like to talk about, you can't replace an ongoing drama with anything else. It's just impossible. Like, we would not be in the... Like, even if you look at people, okay, the BBC say people don't watch television the way they used to, but EastEnders is only getting, what, 4 or 5 million in a good week, if you look at it that way. Nobody's talked about EastEnders going, you know, and that used to be a monster of a show. That was 20, 25 million, you know, in its heyday. So basically, you know, there seems to be a situation... We had the BBC Director General here, where he says, we're not trying to game the system. But yet, at the same time, he had... he did sound a bit of a geezer when he said that. But basically, at that same time, he actually... we're talking about Scottish content, it's thousands of hours of snooker. You know, and the thing is, it is about our voice. It's about what we do. So, you know, surely there's a way that the BBC can kind of work with yourselves and try and find a way out of this, because this drama can't be replaced. It just can't be.
I agree completely. I agree what you're going to bring in. I mean, it's as soon as you take a regular series away, it'll take a long while for it to be replaced by anything. And then there seems to be a thing as well that is the BBC that it's Netflix or Amazon, because the kind of programmes they're talking about doing are the things you usually find on there. So then you think, is that the demographic you're talking about now? Whereas you're getting all ages watching Liver City. Mm-hmm. You know, kids at school to the pensioners sitting there. And I think if you take it away, you lose a part of your own voice. You lose the fact that you can listen to that twice a week and you're going to hear something. It might make you laugh, it might not. It might make you angry, you might think that's absolute rubbish. But at least you can tune in and hear your own voice and hear what's happening in the country. And some of the storylines are fantastical. But again, that's what people like to watch. As long as they're hearing their own voices in it, it makes a big difference.
I think that basically, you know, we're here as equity and as equity members, and I think you have power. You have power to pull the BBC and call them to account. We have a way of doing it as well, by speaking to them, and we have collective agreements with them, and our members work for them. So I would say we do a joint project on this one, you know, and come in on both angles and put the pressure on and ask the questions, the real questions, and get the answers from them. You are powerful people.
Thank you very much.
Don't let it go to your head, George. I'll bring in Patrick Harvey.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, everyone. Can I first just put on the record my thanks to the production team for letting me come and visit the set recently with one of my colleagues and welcoming us there. And as Jackie Bailey knows very well, I grew up about 10 minutes walk away from where that set is based. And when I was growing up, getting involved in Andram at the Dumbarton People's Theatre, who knows, if I'd known that 10 minutes walk away, there was a place where young people were getting their first opportunity in that career, I might never have bothered the Scottish Parliament if things had worked out differently. But
It's just a different drama, mate.
just very different drama. We have, perhaps less explosive plot lines, but there we are. That's the aspect I want to talk about, though, this sense of an ecosystem in which there are those first opportunities for people to start their careers, and that's been talked about very clearly. The BBC and public service broadcasting used to be the bulk of production because there wasn't anything else. And now the BBC is a player in a much more diverse market that's dominated, as Paul and others have been saying, by some of the big streamers who are never going to have a self-interest in investing in that ecosystem. Can I ask, how do we get the BBC or how do we get public service broadcasting and the way it's funded to recognise that they still have that ongoing responsibility to invest in the ecosystem, in the infrastructure, rather than just to produce individual bits of content to put out into a market for viewers?
When people talk about car manufacturers or steel, they talk about it in terms of a broader economic impact. What do you need steel to? Why is steel so important? Because of the things you produce with steel. You can't have a green industrial revolution if you don't have adequate domestic production. When we talk about energy, we don't talk about energy for the sake of energy itself. We talk about energy and how we manage the economy and manage growth in a really broad sense. The BBC is never challenged with those sorts of questions. They're never treated like an economic actor. They're never treated as the most appealing reason that the United Kingdom has for continuous investment here. You can give you all the tax breaks in the world, but if you don't talk about the fact that they have that it's the regular employment that they give to our members and indeed to technical staffs, that essentially creates a platform on which the streamers can build. They are never challenged and held to account as to what role they are playing in economic growth. And that is a very trade union kind of answer to give, but it's true. And I think that is where we're not talking about training opportunities, whatever, because it's nice. We're not talking about it because it's, it gives young people a voice. Very often arts and cultural opportunities are treated as a pathway to something else. We should have more drama in schools so kids are more articulate at giving a corporate presentation. That's not the function of it. We want people to have access to this training in order to work in our industry. Why? Well, A, because we think it's a great social good, but B, the proof of the economic growth that it delivers is astounding. I mean, we were in the north of Ireland the other day talking about how over there, for every pound invested in live performance, it's returning an extra £1.27 back into the local economy. That's the sort of levels of return that you get if you're directly investing in arts and culture. The figures when you start looking at the BBC and what they can produce by having an infrastructure here, attracting streamers, and then all of the ancillary economic activity that happens around that is extraordinary. You don't do that without actors. And how on earth do you have actors living and working in Scotland, telling Scottish stories, if you don't have regular employment for them? And the BBC, their response, I think, in saying there's a £9 million that's ring-fenced, or there'll be 3 more Scottish dramas, it shows that they don't feel like they have to be held accountable on that front. And one of our great worries, 95% of production in this country of scripted content is made on our collective agreements. We're one of the largest entertainment unions in the world. We have agreements with Netflix, we have agreements with Amazon, we have agreements with Apple, all the big players. But 30 years ago, the BBC agreement represented about 50% of the work that our members undertook. Now essentially the only work that's produced on the BBC agreement are the soap operas around the country. They are the only way in which those quality terms and conditions are communicated, because the BBC has outsourced all other forms of production. And for the licence fee payer, there's a duty on the BBC to explain why essentially we're paying into this system, and then who's taking out of it? Well, it's Netflix and it's Amazon. And so how on earth is that a sensible economic strategy if the BBC's function is to provide infrastructure and growth?
It surely also isn't really in the long-term interest of the BBC either, because fundamentally it weakens the political argument for sustaining the licence fee and the principle of public service broadcasting altogether.
Absolutely. The River City debacle is a distilled example of the BBC's bizarre self-loathing and desperate desire to undermine itself. And it is an incredible shame, and audiences as well as artists are losing out as a result.
Thank you. And if I can just put one more question to Frank in particular, as someone who's been at the production for a long time now. BBC Scotland decided, let's make River City. They took a punt, they took a risk. And invested in it. And now we're seeing the plug being pulled, as you say, without consultation, as a kind of bombshell announcement. Can I ask about the period in between? Has there ever been a point when the BBC have come to the production team or the crew or the cast or anybody involved in the whole team and said, look, we need to make some changes to make River City viable for the long term? What positive changes could we make to whether it's experimenting with its format, whether it's investing in any aspect of how it develops, whether it's about how it's promoted? Have they had that conversation at any point about what positive changes might be possible that would give it a stronger future in their eyes?
I think that would be a bit above my pay grade if the BBC were down there. What I do know is that basically from 2010 it was getting cut every time. It was getting cut back. As I say, we've done 2 18-week blocks, and then it was 2 17, then 16, then 14, then now it's down to 12. So you always kind of thought, is there writing on the wall here constantly? But each time we get cut, each time the programme come back punching well above its weight again. So you felt comfortable in your own place down there, that you were producing stuff that people could watch, even though the budgets were getting stretched so tight. And that was a sort of defensive mechanism. It was like, I don't know, people on the battlements almost of saying we're determined that this will go on, no matter what the financial situation at the moment. You keep hoping it's going to get better, but as the way the world is, generally not. But what I would say is that a lot of the young people that do come into it, it's not just to come and do that training and disappear. I mean, there have been people going down there who started as a runner or a driver who've ended up being first ADs on some major dramas. There's a particular boy there, Ryan, who started off as a camera assistant, who's now one of the top cameramen within River City. So there's a way to move through River City itself. It's not just saying, here's a wee shot of this and off you go. It's saying there's a place here for you if we've got the place, but get yourself prepared for other places.
Thanks very much.
Thanks to the panel. I'm just conscious that I last night paid my licence fee, and I should also confess I'm a sporadic viewer of River City. It's one of those things I've dipped into and sometimes not. But at the same time, I know a number of people that have worked on it, members of the cast and at least 2 of the writers who've been involved in it. And it goes to the point that's been made about the value of it being much more to do with being almost like a media or cultural college for Scotland, the central pillar of media in Scotland. But I just wonder, what's been said about the 3 dramas, I understand that point. It's no replacement for what's there just now. And if we're ever to convince, and it's a big if, the BBC to spend the money it gets in Scotland, what, other than River City, and I know we want to try and make sure River City stays, what would have to happen that would replicate the kind of impact? Would it be a soap with all the ongoing opportunities that provides? Is that the only thing that could replace what's there just now and have the same effect? Paul and first.
I mean, I'll let the working actors say, because I think from their perspective, it can be you see the different modes of production, the stability it brings to your working life, which is the kind of core bit of our demands for the BBC. But what I would say is that there are lots of things you could do. I mean, you could commit to producing major sporadic one-off drama in Scotland over a long period of time. But in order to get the sort of same level of impact as you get on River City, it's not 3 dramas and 9 million quid. Actually, you're probably talking about doubling or trebling that amount of money and doubling and trebling that amount of drama output. If that's the kind of commitment the BBC wants to make, then that's very welcome to our members. And if the kind of commitment they want to make is, we are going to ensure that people can afford to live and work in Scotland at every part of the production process, and we're going to offer enough opportunities to provide that as a bedrock, we'll look at it. But actually, soaps are a very, very efficient way of delivering stable employment, popular art, and the broader economic and cultural infrastructure. At the minute, if you look at sort of a standalone one-off drama, short series, they just can't do that at a pound-for-pound difference. Now, if the BBC hasn't got any cash, which is what they constantly tell us when we're in pay negotiations, then that seems to be a very bizarre choice for them to be making. So there are other things they can do, but they are pound for pound more expensive to deliver the same economic output. Why would you move back from London as a Scottish actor to Scotland to work on a production that has a limited lifespan on it, unless you know that there's a rich and thriving cultural scene that you can get other work on? That's the problem, and that's what River City provides. Not a safety net, but a platform on which to build.
Jobs and the opportunities it creates. There is the fact, I think the point that Frank was making about the authentic voice. It's a Scottish voice, and none of those other options would necessarily replicate that. But they're turning down the voice of Scotland, really, in relation to this. And there's no guarantee it would be replaced or replicated. It's a kind of cultural vandalism here, because what you'd then end up being, I would imagine, is occasionally being surprised to hear a Scottish voice in a soap or elsewhere in the UK or a drama, rather than knowing you can tune into something where you're going to hear something that you can relate to because it's in your own voice. Would that be your view, Frank?
I think if the BBC are looking for other things, there's one other way of looking at it. They could invest some more money in River City and bring it up to the level that they think it should be, or bring it up to the level that makes it relevant more. Because if you're looking at scrounging around for other things to do, instead of bringing dramas, you go, well, why don't we invest in what we've already got here and try and make that? You could end up having, at one point we were doing hour-long episodes, and that sustained itself for long enough. And I know things change in TV all the time, but you think, why is your answer to everything just to cut it? What about actually investing in it and hoping for better results?
Do you want to add anything, Melinda?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely. It's the long-term commitment of things. That's the thing, and that it's that's one of the most important things in terms of security for performers and those working in the thing and building on the back of it. I've not understood what the other is. The other thing I would say is, these potential 3 other things that they are, which will be whatever they are, will have a definite commercial pressure put on them, often from the streamers. I came into your building just now and I saw there was a big placard out there talking about LGBT+ and equality, diversity and inclusion. I don't have to explain to you who is President of the United States at the moment and exactly what has been announced as regards to EDI, and the number of streamers who've already stood there and said we're losing our EDI commitment. Warner Brothers, Paramount, Disney, Amazon. So those will be the people that will be coming into this nation going, I don't care what your law is. As far as we're concerned, we've got our own rules. So if we are going to push, for Scotland 2025, with marginalised communities being pushed out, where the diversity of this country is going to be ignored, then there's something wrong.
So last point, your point then is that soap, an ongoing long-term commitment, provides better opportunities for diversity, equality and inclusion.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the point you make is about it being Scottish voices is really, really important. We also have to ask ourselves which Scottish voices. Is it the story of working class Scottish people that they see on screen? Is it working class Scottish artists getting employment opportunities? We have 50,000 members. The average income of our members over the course of a year is £15,000 a year from the industry. the average income across the UK is £36,000. So that is an extraordinary, that's driven not by low pay when they're in work, it's driven by the scarcity of work, the precarity of work. And by removing River City, what you do is you remove any sort of opportunity for working class artists to think this is something I can do. And I think, you know, if the average, if you're sat watching your kid in a nativity play and they come off and they're really good and they say, Mom, Dad, I want to be an actor, no matter how much people might call our members lovies and think that it's an industry paved with gold, in that moment, a working class parent knows they do not want their child to be an artist because of the economic precarity that it brings. And things like River City, things like soap work, and actually, frankly, the fact that those working class people are paying their licence fee, they deserve not only to have their stories told, but they deserve to have their children working, and indeed their brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles and grandparents working in those industries that they are paying for. And it's a very, very different point of pressure from a commercial streaming operation that's run out of the United States or anywhere else. That is what the loss of River City is emblematic of. And it's why, look, we're very realistic. What we want is a pause, a deep consultation about how this can be done differently, a national soap strategy across the UK so we can manage our members' expectations and their terms and conditions, and then some commitments about what, not just Scottish drama, but serious investment in Scotland, ensuring that licence fee payers, pound for pound, their money is returned to them, and that actually you're growing the economic and social opportunities that presents. Those are our demands, and that's what we can deliver, what we're going to be pushing to deliver industrially.
I think it's very useful to have had the offer from Linda to try and work together in relation to this. I think our ability to influence BBC Scotland is difficult enough without trying to influence the rest of the BBC in the UK, to be honest. But I think we should do that. And just for full transparency, I'm not from Dumbarton. I took the high road down to Garnock Way when I was younger. I'm from Edinburgh. So.
Ms. Fair.
Very much, Convener. I have a confession. I'm not just the MSP for Dumbarton. I feel as if I'm the de facto MSP for Shield Inch as well. Now, I have had the benefit of speaking directly to the landlord because I knew who the landlord was. To suggest that they were surprised that BBC Scotland indicated they wanted to leave would perhaps be an understatement. They were completely, and they were expecting the lease to be renewed. They had no plans to do anything else other than that to continue the lease. Now, for whatever reason, it appears that the BBC was happy to have people believe that it was down to the actions of the landlord and not a decision that they made themselves, which frankly is simply not true. So I wonder, why do you think they did that? Paul, do you want to go first?
Because they haven't got a plan. It's a very convenient excuse. I mean, I have to say, when we were first told about this, and in good faith, you know, you take what the BBC is saying, why on earth can a commercial landlord pull the rug from underneath a key piece of broadcasting and economic infrastructure? If this was a possibility, why didn't the BBC have a 10-year contract? Why didn't they have a 10-year plan? Why? So even if what the BBC was saying, or still are kind of saying in a mealy-mouthed sort of way, was true, it actually, frankly, I think that if it's true, it's even worse for the BBC, that they hadn't got a plan. And again, it's one of the reasons why we want a UK-wide soap strategy, because if what you're saying is, well, River City's going because, you know, there's a general, you know, issue with soaps and all the landlords, well, you know, it's a bit precarious there, and so that's why it's River City and not Pobbley-Cum, and that's why it's River City and not EastEnders. Well, that's a bizarre set of behaviours on the part of the BBC. So to find out that it is dubious was shocking. And again, I want to take it back to, we can talk about the economic importance, we can talk about the social importance, the structural importance. This is people's jobs. This is people's lives. This is how people, you know, clothe their children and pay their gas bill. And actually to find out that the BBC, at the very least, has been less than straight with them about the circumstances in which they are going, to have no guarantees about what their exit packages will look like, to have no guarantees about when their contracts would end, to have no thought or consultation with the union about that, that's fundamentally undignified. I mean, I don't know whether Frank wants to talk about the attitude. I was in the green room on the day that a question mark was raised over the position of the landlord, and I have to say, I'm not sure parliamentary language could possibly express the general feeling of our members.
Well, it was one of shock. because there was one question asked that day from one of the actors to the people from the BBC of saying, how can you let a lease run out like that? It's almost impossible. People are in touch with each other maybe 6 months before leases are coming to an end, maybe a year. But you're coming down here to tell us it's just been sprung on you. That's the reason. But there was a couple of few reasons put in, none of which I'm privy to, whether they're true or not. But some way it just sounded like we're just making this up. We need something to say, and that's what we're going to say. And afterwards, you were finding out things like from Jackie and things like that, going, it's not true. And that's what can you do, though? I mean, as I say before, it's well above my pay grade to get involved in stuff like that. I still work there. I'd be quite happy to work for the next year. But there was a sense of shock and just disbelief of they could be that stupid to let something like that happen.
And clearly, Convener, it was the case from the landlord's own mouth that there was no such intention to end the lease. So it's very disappointing that that impression was given. Can I take this slightly wider to the actual production facilities at Dumbarton? Because it's not just River City that will end. All production will cease at Dumbarton as the lease is then given up. Now, the BBC seem to think that they can manage without permanent production facilities in Scotland, and they're not going to be replacing the capacity that was afforded by the studios at Dumbarton on a permanent basis. What do you think are the implications for that decision? Don't know who wants to go first. Linda?
Well, it's definitely jobs, isn't it? It's a lack of commitment completely. You know, I know of this across the UK where something closes down and it's been used for other facilities as well because people coming there, it's very easy. There's an established setup. There's basically a good unit base there from which to operate. And guess what? Yeah, once that goes... It's that what's it's identifying very clearly from what's been said is it just shows how London-centric the BBC is. They deny it. They talk about, you know, BBC Scotland, BBC Northern Ireland, or whatever it is. But trust me, for them to have not have the capacity to understand when they're actually just going to come in and say, like, OK, we've just let that run out. And actually, well, let's be honest, fib, I think. Because there's an economy of truth there, let's be frank. You know, it's disgusting. And it will be jobs, and it'll be long-term jobs. Because once it goes, once they disappear, they don't come back quickly. It goes somewhere else, and all you get is white caravans coming in, the big ones on a big unit base, stopping somewhere to film the Highlands or whatever it is, or inner city Glasgow, and then clearing off again. And trust me, they probably won't be from Scotland.
And I think it goes back to the question that Mr. Brown asked, because the bang for your buck that you get from River City, the BBC is right that without River City as the anchor for Dumbarton, it loses a lot of its economic rationale. So River City is there providing that plank in order for other production to happen on and around it. That is how soaps play this vital part in the industrial ecosystem of the industry. So again, it's the BBC not making a very strategic decision about, okay, if the Dumbarton studios have got to close at some point, then they should get a permanent home and a permanent base. And if I may give you a cautionary tale, the most underinvested in national region in the United Kingdom from the BBC is the Midlands in England. Now, they receive the English Midlands region pays in 26% of the licence fee, but receives 2% back. And that has been the case for 14 of the last 15 years. What is the principal driver of that? The closure of Pebble Mill in Birmingham 20 years ago. So when they say we don't need these facilities in order to make production, it's true. Yeah, there's lots of production you can do remotely. The world is very different now. The world is much more interconnected. But what's our experience of where you have done that? A lot of the platforms, a lot of the infrastructure goes, all of a sudden the broader investment goes as well. And there are cautionary tales everywhere. And in Scotland, we are very fortunate to have the facility of this committee, the facility of the scrutiny powers of the Parliament, in order to get, hopefully, some different answers out of the BBC and get BBC Scotland, at least, to think in a slightly different way from their counterparts in London.
Convener, I have one last request of you, which is whether the committee would indeed consider a visit to River City So you can see the scale of the operation, the ecosystem that supports it, and who knows, Patrick Harvey might get a walk-on part, as many Dumbarton residents have in their time, and I would commend that to the committee.
Okay. We will take that on board, Ms Bailey, and discuss it as a committee, but thank you for bringing it up. If I could just finish with a question. Obviously, the remit of the committee is to follow the work of the Cabinet Secretary for Culture, and obviously film industry as such in Scotland is seen as a shining example of a growth industry, many successes, and we also have the other issue of fair work agenda in Scotland, and I would just wonder if in terms of the ecosystem that Patrick Harvey was talking about, is just what impact this will have if that facility goes, and will it, you've outlined some of the areas there, but in terms of, I'd be really interested to understand the fair work part of it, the less precarious work, I won't say it was not precarious, Frank, but less precarious work for people working within that industry, and whether as a public sector broadcaster, the BBC is really meeting some of its objectives in those areas. Maybe go to Paul first.
So I mean, I think I'll start, if I may, just the point of precarity is really important. I think it's important to acknowledge how brave Frank is. There's a number of River City cast members, equity members who are here with us today. As I say, pay in our industry is so phenomenally low, and to speak out. Precarity, this is, I'm not making a specific accusation about the BBC, but when precarity is baked into an industry, it is there to stop people standing up for their rights and challenging decisions which they see as wrong for the workforce. That is a core part of it. And one of our anxieties as a trade union is that River City, its loss would mark an increasing precarity in the industry and an increasing inability for people to enter, but also an inability for people to speak out freely and be part of the industries in which they are fundamentally creating the capital. And it's phenomenally brave of them to stand up and do it not just for artists or for themselves, but to do it for audiences and infrastructure in Scotland. What is that impact? I think it's worth saying as well, to follow up with Jackie, I think if you all went to Dumbarton, saw the infrastructure that's there, saw the scale of it, frankly, for something that in your mind is quite a small TV production, but you look at the people, from everybody who's serving you your lunch all the way through to the artists on the set, it's an extraordinary operation, and you see what that means economically. I have to pay tribute to Jackie, Neil, Pam Duncan Clancy, those others who came down to visit us, but also to the Cabinet Secretary, who has been, I think, very robust on the issue, and full credit to him for coming to an all-member meeting of our members and giving a very clear sort of vision as to where he feels his role is there, and I feel certainly asking the right questions. But what we really need from the committee is that approach to the BBC. Not just, oh, well, you'll get a bit of drama, that's okay, this is an artistic question. And actually, if it's about an editorial issue, that's none of your business. This is, well, how could you possibly lose Dumbarton? How is it so precarious as a major production facility? What do you mean? 9 million quid, how long, how far, how many hours, how many people, how many of them will be based here? What are the metrics you're going to assess it by? And tell us, what is the roadmap to deliver every penny that a Scottish licence fee payer spends to be delivered back in Scotland, not just for work that's badged as Scottish, not just for Scottish artists who are forced to live outside of Scotland because they can only have a career elsewhere, but how are you going to ensure that you're building a cultural infrastructure that attracts investment and growth? Those are the big questions for the BBC.
Linda?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm also thinking of the locality of Dumbarton as well, if you go to, Media City in Salford, or what was the old Granada Studios, or you go to Chilwell or wherever, the local community who live nearby, even though they may not all work there, have a sense of identity about the place. It's theirs. It's something that they own, in the sense of it's a locality, a regional identity. And that will go. That will disappear. And the other thing about precarity is that, people could lose their homes. And if they decide that is at risk, they will move. You are going to lose talent again. We've known it happen in the past from Scotland. I know many people have gone down to London or wherever because they couldn't make a living. I'm very pleased that some people have been able to do that and have a long-term plan. It's very rare. Soaps and continuing dramas are one of the few bits of the industry now, maybe apart from some opera singers and opera companies, although that's now dodgy, that could potentially think about a long-term place to work and be. Many other people will get a job and they'll be there for years. It's not, I know things have changed, but overall there's a sort of bit of security. This was one bit of security. Sometimes when I was doing the soaps, I breathed a sigh of relief that I could pay off the overdraft and actually get myself back on the straight and narrow. And, you know, and that is so important. You take that away and you know, you really are throwing people out to the wolves, basically. So I speak from the heart about this, about what it feels like and the plans, etc., for those people who live in that area. Added to which, and the one other thing I would say is, those other soaps have opened their doors to go, here we are, this is Coronation Street or Emmerdale, come and look at our set, come and look at our identity, etc. They're queuing to look at Game of Thrones and Derry Girls, you know? And again, there's economic opportunities that are being missed there. I don't know how often there are studio tours or whatever, but those things are important. And they'll probably come. They pop in. I think they let some people in sometimes go and look at that. But all I would say ultimately is it's the long-term view and the security that so rarely happens in this industry, and that this River City offers to those performers and crew and technicians. Thank you.
Frank, I'm not asking you to reveal anything personal about your own circumstances, but in general, the contracts in River City, are there salaried actors? Is it a contract based on the production time?
Freelance.
It's freelance. So nearly everyone is a freelance.
Yeah. I think what Linda's saying it a lot, that's right. And I think if you just look, if you are there one day and you look and you see the amount of people that's milling around, each one with a purpose in themselves, and then just imagine it's blank. And everything's gone. You can't say, oh, they've moved on to somewhere else. Because it is a training ground to bring people through so that they have the experience to move on somewhere else. But if there's no way of doing that at all, where do they go?
Is that freelance nature, does that apply to the production crew as well?
Just to be hyper-technical and clear, Frank's quite right. So people are freelance for the purposes of tax. They're LIMBY workers for the purposes of employment law and for the purposes of collective bargaining. So there's a sort of dual status, if you like, of a tax status and working under a collective agreement treated as a LIMBY worker. I gather on River City the production is a bit of a mix of, in terms of technicians, some of them are permanently employed and others will be on a sort of freelance kind of capacity basis. But consequently, our members, you know, I believe they have full rights once they've been engaged for 2 years or more. Where else in the industry do you get engaged for 2 years or more than on a soap opera or maybe a long-running West End show? I mean, that's basically your only option. And there is a very big Fair Work question there. You take away this sort of employment, you take away those sorts of engagements. The nature of soaps is people get killed off. You know, people move on, storylines change. Our members accept a degree of precarity baked into even the most secure work. Our collective agreements deal with that. You're getting a severance payment when you're getting bumped off. That's our position. But that level of uncertainty is something we fundamentally accept. It's something our collective agreements deal with. It's a very different sort of uncertainty from being in a show that might have 1 season, 2 seasons, unpredictable storyline, main tiny core cast. That is a real. There's a real difference in the quality of employment, if you like, or the stability of the employment that's offered in those two scenarios.
I think I've got a final question from Mr. Brown.
Just to say, I think going back to the question of diversity, it's fantastic you've managed to find a leading role for a Hibs fan in the cast as well. I was going to ask, though, that it's all centred, obviously, very much on the BBC for obvious reasons. But the point that's been made by members of the panel is the kind of symbiotic relationship between what the BBC do, what River City does, and Netflix and Amazon and Paramount or whoever else. Is there not a case for looking at those organisations, I know it may be a bit of a fool's errand, to say, can they not contribute in some way to what we want to see, which is a permanent, almost like the kind of informal cultural college that River City has produced for different careers and so on within the industry, for them to contribute as well? Or would that just be something that they wouldn't consider?
I mean, I'll be very blunt. I mean, I'm not sure that the streamers do pay their way in terms of infrastructure in the United Kingdom as a whole, and I don't think, but we have to be realistic about one of the reasons why they come here in such great numbers is because the BBC provides the infrastructure. I'm not sure the BBC always gets the best deal. I think there is a degree of asset stripping of the state going on, if I'm honest. The pressures that the streamers then create to the economic and kind of administrative concerns of the BBC mean that they go in a more corporate direction, which leads to sort of death loop downwards, to the point, as I say, now I went to a fascinating roundtable with the major streamers and the government in Westminster back in 2022, where it was very clear that the biggest advocates of the licence fee in the BBC were the streamers, not the government and not the BBC themselves, because they recognise that infrastructure. That's the reality of how the industry works. And actually, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that part of the role of the state is to provide that infrastructure, attract that investment. But the BBC doesn't take that role very seriously, and it doesn't advocate for or speak about that role. We also have to be realistic about what's going to happen. Donald Trump has been very clear that he believes that Hollywood is dying, and part of the reason is that all of that work is being exported. Now, I don't think the fact that people working on Barbie on a British collective agreement is destroying Hollywood. I don't believe the fact that Indiana Jones, Star Wars, or indeed the small independent drama is made on British collective agreements in the United Kingdom or in Scotland is a threat to Hollywood. In fact, I think it helps it. But Donald Trump doesn't think that. So the idea that we are at a moment where the BBC can rely on some sort of streamers levy, some sort of encouragement for them to invest, so to publicly and openly say we are committed to broadcasting and investment in Scotland or indeed in anywhere outside of the US, this is not the political moment for them to do that. That ship has kind of sailed. So in reality, there is one place to go, and I think I'm at risk of getting my figures slightly wrong, but we've got to remember the incredible value of the BBC to the licence fee payer amidst complaints of its cost. As I say, the overwhelming majority of people watch more than 8 hours of BBC content a week. I think the average British household pays around £500 a year in TV subscriptions now, and £150 of which is the licence fee. Now, if you look at what you're getting pound for pound, hour for hour, there's been an awful lot of talk in the press recently about Adolescence, an incredibly moving, important drama produced, to be fair, by a streamer. Well, the talk has been, how do we get this into schools? It's the wrong conversation. This isn't a programme designed for children, this is a programme designed for adults. And 20 years ago, it would have been watched by every adult in this country because it would have been on a public service broadcaster to which everybody had equal access. If you want to watch the football of the weekend, you were able to watch it because it was on the BBC, ITV or Channel 4. This is about an erosion of an equality of opportunity for people to watch. The more we're dependent on streamers for whom you pay an annual fee or a monthly fee, the more you're digitally excluding audiences. So again, encouraging the streamers and getting them to invest in return for a levy is one thing, but there are great unintended consequences. You can't replace the infrastructure of public service broadcasting for audiences or stability of employment for artists. And only the BBC has an interest in British economic growth. Only the BBC has an interest in British intellectual property or building British infrastructure. And the BBC should have more of a commitment to Scotland and Scottish infrastructure and Scottish stories rather than just the United Kingdom as a whole, which necessarily makes it a London-centric organisation. That is the strategy that has to be demanded from them.
The context that Trump wants to set for us as a means not to pursue this, and it would be interesting if the committee were to get people like Netflix and Paramount in front of them and find out, you've said they benefit greatly from this, let's try and monetise that bit. Anyway, thanks, Convener.
Thank you. I'm glad we'd managed not to get drawn down the football route there. It's a common theme in this committee, I have to say. But I just want to say thank you very much for your appearance this morning. The committee has a great interest in our cultural remit in terms of Creative Scotland, and we've talked a lot about the ecosystem in Scotland, and for me that's one of the things that I really see at risk here. Many of the actors that are in River City at the moment I saw coming up through the National Theatre Scotland, Citizens Theatre, all of which contribute to the culture of Scotland, and are all made more precarious by this decision going forward. So thank you once again, and we'll now have a short break while we move into our next section.